Adam Gorney, and there he is. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Gorney, all one word. He is the national recruiting director for Rivals and Yahoo Sports. Adam, just jump into the conversation. We've just been talking about, from a big picture standpoint, Texas pulling off what it did in light of the season that it had is kind of unexpected for us because we had heard so much wait and see from the top prospects. When you look at what Texas has done and putting itself into a position to finish among the nationally elite this year in recruiting, from your perspective, what did they do? Like, how did we get to this point?
Yeah, I mean, from following that season, what they did in recruiting was incredibly impressive because you look at the teams ahead of them in the national team rankings. Alabama obviously played for a national championship, won the SEC. Texas A&M on the, kind of knocking on the door of the college football playoff and has an incredible class. Georgia won the national championship, and then Ohio State won the Rose Bowl. And then Texas, a 5-7 team who kind of struggled, who lost to Kansas, who blew some leads, who really things were not going well this season for them, frustrating, did not look competitive in some games against some really good teams. And so I think, what they did in recruiting was really impressive. It's a credit, I think, to start and talk about Sark. And like you guys said, he is a head coach who's not kind of the CEO closer type. He's involved very much. I saw him at games in Southern California this year. He's out on the road being very active in recruiting. I think that helps. He's developed relationships from previous stops that he's definitely leveraged to get kids to go to Texas, if not only visit, but to commit and sign. You look at some of the West Coast kids, his time at Alabama certainly will help develop that relationship. And then the longer he's in the state, the more relationships he'll develop and recruiting will go even better. But like you said, the next step is important. He's got to not lose to Kansas. He has to beat Baylor. He has to not blow leads. Those kinds of things will turn kids off at some point. But Texas still has a lot of cachet. Sark is going to be a very active recruiter, and he has a lot of people around him that are going to recruit really well too.
Yeah, Adam, that was kind of leading into, one of the things I, wanted to ask was, it seemed like that them going 5-7 and doing what they did is somewhat of an anomaly. That's not sustainable, right? That's not the formula for success going forward. Like you're not going to expect, Texas to finish 6-6 or 7-6 and still finish in the top 5 in, 2023, are you?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I would also not expect Texas to finish 5-7 with the talent that they have in this class and that they bring in through the portal, which we can talk about. So I think that's going to be an important thing moving forward. I will tell you this, kids still think very highly of Texas. Texas kids think that. I think you can see that from the recruiting class in the state. This is also a team that hasn't won more than 10 games once in a decade. So that, this isn't necessarily a national powerhouse program that people need to go to visit, but they are recruiting like that this year for sure. They've recruited like that in years past. I think this year, Sark goes 5-7. That turns around with the talent that they're absolutely bringing in.
Adam Gorney joining us from Rivals.com here on the Orange Bloods live National Signing Day 2.0 show, National Signing Day 2, the most exciting of all National Signing Days. Adam, we're waiting to see what Devon Campbell does. To say that Rivals is a fan of him would be an understatement. He finishes the year as the #1 ranked offensive lineman in the country for Rivals, despite the fact him projecting as an inside guy and doesn't bring, on paper, the obvious tackle upside and value that I think you would normally expect. To tell everybody in your mind who Campbell is. He's a guy that has been talked about for 2 years now, but that he's finished at such a high level and it performs so well against nationally elite players, and just for 2 straight years always delivered. It seems like every time he was in a platform to kind of prove it. I love this dude as a player.
Yeah, what I saw from him at the Under Armour game against national competition is, and to put this delicately early in the morning, he's the meanest, toughest SOB out there. I mean, he wants to fight people. He wants to battle. He wants to go in. And if the quarterback ever gets on his back, never let it happen again. He's going to, play through the whistle. He's going to battle inside. There's, a lot of times at these all-star events, guys take 2 reps, do well, and then sit out the rest of the week. That was not him. He wanted to go every single rep. He just has an attitude about him that we love. I love offensive linemen, that have a little bit of hate in their heart, and he's got it. And I think that really stands out about him. In a year, and we can talk about this too, in a year where there was not an offensive tackle who really stood out and said, this must be the number 1 offensive tackle in the country. This must be the number 1 offensive lineman. We decided to go with Campbell because he does have position versatility. He has had it in his high school career. He just wants to beat people into the dirt. I think that's why Texas recruited him so hard. And I'm almost certain that they're going to get him today.
Wow. Damn. You guys good. By the way, good information on Campbell. I want to jump into a topic, and Catch, feel free to jump back into if you want to go more offensive line or Neto or some of the other guys.
Well, I'm definitely asking him about Kelvin Banks.
Okay. All right. So we'll go back to that. So how do you, I'm just kind of curious as you're evaluating Texas from a recruiting perspective, what do you think of what they did through the transfer portal? They're able to get Quinn Ewers. They're able to get Ryan Watts, Jaleel Billingsley. It almost seems like Rivals, we need to have some transfer portal rankings because that seems to be the next phase and wave. But within, as you start talking about what Texas did from a recruiting perspective, your thoughts on those additions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And believe me, from our perspective, we are desperately waiting for those transfer rankings to come. We want to, my goal as the national recruiting director is to have a complete reflection of a recruiting class. So there are teams across the country that withhold spots for transfer portal guys. We don't want those teams to be penalized just because they're not recruiting as many high school guys, because they know they have people on staff whose entire job is to refresh the transfer portal. We know that they're bringing guys in. We know that they're not recruiting quarterbacks because they're bringing a guy in, or, they've made it clear that they're bringing 2 in and only 1 high school guy. All the things that we're juggling now with the transfer portal, we will want to have reflect in our rankings. But yes, Texas did a phenomenal job. Getting Quinn Ewers changes the scope of what they can be next year. Allowing Sark to have Quinn Ewers run that offense is going to be impressive. Bringing in Alabama's tight end is going to be impressive. I think as you go through this, and honestly, Texas is one of the teams that really hasn't leveraged it as much as some others. Some teams have changed the entire scope of what their team is going to look like next year from the transfer portal. Oklahoma lost 2 5-star quarterbacks in the stretch of a few weeks into the portal. And that's the way kind of college football is going to look. It's going to look, at least for the time being, until people get their hands around it. There are more people in the portal than spots available for them, so it might calm down a little bit. But if I'm a struggling coach, or if I'm a coach that after year 1 or 2 things are not going well, I'm not going to go out and get a high school quarterback that I need to kind of groom for 1 or 2 more years. I might not be there. I'm going to go out and get portal guys. And I'm not saying by any means that's Sark's situation right now, but when a Quinn Ewers situation presents itself, you absolutely go after him. And juggling that in recruiting and relationships and the management of the things has made things a lot more complicated, but from our end, honestly, a lot more fun to watch.
Adam Gorney of Rivals.com joining us here on the Orangewood Signing Day show. Adam, I wanted to go back to Kelvin Banks simply because, what happened with him at the Under Armour game, and, he had been, if I'm not mistaken, he was ranked 10th in the country and might have been the number 1 offensive lineman. I can't really remember what the rankings before the most recent rankings look like. We all, even at Orange Bloods, we were there. We agreed that it was not his best week in practice. We thought he played well in the game. But during the week, even though making the move from left tackle to right tackle, a lot of Texas fans have felt like he shouldn't have been punished for playing a position that he didn't know really well. Can you walk us through when you guys got together as a recruiting rankings unit to talk about rankings, to talk about players? I know the last thing in the world you guys ever want to do is give a guy a 5th star and then take it away. It's one of the reasons why you guys are so cautious in giving out 5 stars early on in the first place. You don't ever want to have to do that. So can you walk us through what those conversations sounded like when that ends up happening to Kelvin Banks? And, he took a pretty large plummet from the most previous rankings before the end of 2022 and then with the final update.
Yeah, and that is a good point. And that is something that I don't know if we're right on or wrong on. It seems like giving a kid a 5-star is a whole lot easier than taking it away. Once he's in that 5-star world, and we've been in this for a long time, it's just kind of hard to move them back down. It's almost being like, penalizing him to an nth degree there, which is unfair. I'll speak openly about what we saw from Kelvin Banks during the week of practice. I thought he struggled immensely with speed, with power. I didn't know what was going on because when we saw him at the Rivals camp in Dallas, the guy was a complete ass kicker. He wanted every rep and he dominated every single rep. And Cam Dewberry was there and Will Campbell was there, guys that finished ranked ahead of him. And he looked better than them and he played better than them and everything kind of came together. And like I said before, this is a class where we're really not sold on who's the number 1 offensive tackle. Probably 1 through 6, even Banks included, could make an argument right now for number 1. None of them have really dominated to that level that we're like, man, this is definitely the guy. So as we sit down, we're like, is there a 5-star offensive tackle in this class? And the way our rankings work is college performance and then projected NFL draft position. So I basically said, look, we're going to have guys drafted in the first round of the NFL draft at offensive tackle. It's an inevitability. And we're probably not going to get them right, but let's take a shot on who we think could possibly end up there. And after the week that we saw at Under Armour, we could not, in good faith, put Kelvin Banks in that position. And so what we said is, what we're going to do? We're going to take a guy who's super versatile, who moved inside and did incredibly well at the All-American Bowl, and Elijah Pritchett put him 1. Zach Rice stays a 5-star because he did nothing at Under Armour to drop. And then Josh Connerly, who is crazy athletic, we're going to make a 5-star and take a shot and put him in a projection. So it does look like Kelvin Banks plummeted, but really, he's still around 65 in the country. That projects him into about the second round of the NFL draft. We don't think he's a bum. We think he's a very, very talented and good player. We just needed to kind of move him down. I do give the kid credit. Some kids didn't show up to the games. Some kids showed up and didn't do much. And so how do you reflect that in a ranking compared to a kid who came, who worked hard, who was there all week and took his lumps? We didn't want to plummet the kid, but I think after his performance there that week, he did have to move down a little bit.
So one of the things I'll ask though, how much did the factoring of the switching positions kind of play a part in that, going from left to right, being, from what we understand, one of the few, if not the only guys who volunteered to do that. So it's interesting because you talked about Campbell, right? And how much of a competitor that he was and willing to do all these things. It sounds like Banks also had some of that competitiveness within him to say, okay, I'll raise my hand. I'll switch. I'll move over there. Did you guys think, all right, well, this was a brand new position for him. Maybe we're judging him a little bit too harshly.
Yeah, that was definitely part of the conversation. There were some on that call that wanted to actually drop him lower. And I didn't want 1 week of bad performance to be reflective of 3 years of great performances. And so, he was not the only one at those all-star games who moved positions. Elijah Pritchett they loaded up his team at the All-American Bowl with tackles, so he moved inside and actually played guard, which is an entirely different position. So some of that feeling is, yes, we should not kill the kid because he moved from left tackle to right tackle. But also on the flip side of that is, if he can't handle the speed off the edge at right tackle, what do we think? Why do we think he can at left tackle? So, it was one of those issues that it was just we saw everybody ahead of him, and we thought they played better on a national level than he did that week. Sixth in the country is nothing to sniff at. So I mean, sixth in the country at his position is nothing to sniff at. I think we just needed to make an adjustment after seeing everybody over a 2-week period.
Adam Gorney joining us here on our National Signing Day 2 show. Adam, last question, I'll let you go. And by the way, thank you for giving us some time today. I realize this is probably one of about 100 media commitments you have. So I'll let you move on and get ready for what comes next, in addition to all of the millions of things that might happen today as we wait for a number of guys to make their decisions. The quarterback situation, real quickly. Cade Klubnik doesn't have anything to do with Texas, but Anwar and I love the kid. And it was probably about 14 months ago when he and we just had a huge crush on the kid. I made big waves not too long afterwards where I moved Klubnik ahead of Quinn Ewers. And again, we're talking about really fine margins. If I tell you one's 2 and the other's 3 in the state, you more than anybody realizes, okay, so you think one guy's 15th in the country and the other guy's 17th. It's right. A really close thing. In a world where Ewers is classified in the 2022 class instead of reclassified when he goes to Ohio State, how would that battle have looked? What do you think about, obviously Quinn Ewers is at Texas now. I'm just curious about those two guys. I mean, Ewers finishes number 3 overall in Rivals rankings. Even if you think Ewers stays at number 1, we'd be talking about the potentially number 1 and number 4 players. Just talk about them contrasting and how that might have looked if they'd stayed together and maybe played each other again in a playoff game, which would have been quite the event had a round 2 occurred between those two guys.
Yeah, I would have loved to have that debate over the last year. It would have been incredibly interesting, and here's why. Because when you see Quinn Ewers throw a football, it's very rare. I mean, it pops, it flies. Everything he does is really impressive on a football field. When I saw him at the Elite 11 in the summer right before he reclassified, I was like, man, this looks how Trevor Lawrence throws a football. This is legit elite football throwing. I mean, it's really impressive. It looked different coming off his arm, coming off his hand than anybody else at that event. The problem is that Cade Klubnik is such a gamer, such an incredible leader of his team, a winner, all of those things, and is still incredibly talented on a football field. So do you take the guy who looks different and kind of has a little Mahomesy in him where he can kind of sidearm it, where he's comfortable throwing on the run against the grain in Ewers? Or do you take a kid like Klubnik who every time he's on a football field, he wins and everybody loves him, and maybe he's not the most physically impressive kid, but he's the biggest gamer in this entire class. So in my heart, I think Ewers probably would have had the edge just from like a projection standpoint over the next 5-10 years. But I don't think that means Klubnik would have dropped much out of the top 5 at all. I think we would have had 2 Texas quarterbacks in that top 5, probably 1 and 3, maybe 2 and 4, something in that range. And who knows if we would have gotten it right or whatever. But both are incredible talents, and I think both have very, very bright futures at Texas and Clemson ahead of them.
Yeah, it'll be fun watching both of those guys do their thing at the next level. Adam Gorney, Rivals.com. Give him a follow on Twitter at Adam Gorney. Read his stuff over at Rivals.com. It's there all the time. His most recent article, if I'm not mistaken, and Adam, you can correct me, he's got predictions on all of the unsigned Rivals 250 guys on where we think they'll go today. So if you want to see what he says about Banks, Harold Perkins, any of the guys making decisions today that we'll be watching, It's right there. Just go to the front page of Rivals.com. Adam, thank you. Be well. Go enjoy the rest of your day.
See you guys.
Thank you, Adam.